Hey everyone, I'm Paul, and today I'm replacing the front ball joints in my 1997 Toyota RAV4. I installed new ball joints from Autozone when I did the suspension restoration on my car, but last time I was working on it, when I replaced the CV axles, I stripped out one of the ball joint bolts by torquing it to Toyota's factory specs. Weird. I feel like I'm being watched. Is that a UFO? Must be my imagination.
I use a wood block so the jack doesn't bend the frame, and the jack stand goes under the lower control arm mount. The lug nuts take a 21mm socket. Let's get the wheel out of the way. The ball joint has a cotter pin going through it. Bend the pin as straight as possible. I clamped it with vice grips and used a hammer and extension bar to pull the cotter pin out. Lock 2 wrenches together to loosen the ball joint nut. If this doesn't work, you'll have to remove the CV axle from the spindle and use an impact wrench. The ball joint has 2 nuts and 1 bolt holding it onto the control arm. I put the nuts back on for now. The separator tool is tapered, so it pushes the ball joint out of the spindle. You have to hit it very hard and it will tear the ball joint boot. I just repainted my control arms, so I'm using a piece of rubber with my pry bar. The pry bar goes into the big hole in the control arm. Push the control arm down and remove the ball joint. Let's compare the ball joints. The Autozone part is on the left. Starting with the hardware, we have a bolt that says 12.9 on it. That's nice, but the corresponding threads stripped out when I tightened it to 94 foot-pounds, which is the Toyota torque spec for the ball joints. Here we have a couple nylon locking nuts, and on the Toyota side we have a bolt with the number 10 on it, and these nuts don't appear to have a locking feature. There's a pretty big difference when you look at the bottom of the ball joint. The Autozone ball joint has that annoying grease zerk that you have to keep filling with grease once in a while, and the Toyota part is greased from the factory and you never have to deal with it. The Autozone ball joint is hard to move and grinds a bit when you move it back and forth. This ball joint has less than 10,000 miles on it. That sucks. And of course the Toyota part is perfectly smooth. Add some Loctite to the ball joint and 2 nuts. Add grease to the tapered part and cotter pin. Have you noticed cotter pins are always rusty and stuck? Let's prevent that. Now the new ball joint is ready to go in. Gently push the control arm down with the pry bar and install the ball joint. I put the tapered part into the spindle first, then moved the studs into the control arm. The Toyota ball joint comes with a castle nut and a cotter pin. You have to buy the bolt and 2 nuts separately or reuse the old ones. I have the part number listed for the castle nut, but you won't need that. All these bolts take a 17mm socket. I'll torque them later. Thread on the castle nut next. Get it tight with a 19mm wrench. I went inside the car and locked the steering wheel so the spindle won't turn. Now lock 2 wrenches together for more torque and get it almost as tight as you can. Now go just a little bit tighter until one of the slots in the castle nut lines up with the hole in the bolt and you can install the cotter pin. Bend both sides of the cotter pin enough that it can't fall out. I gave it an extra squeeze with pliers so it won't rattle. The torque specification from Toyota for the ball joints is 94 foot-pounds. Going to 94 stripped the threads in the Autozone ball joints. I'm installing Toyota parts this time, but I still think that's too tight and I'm torquing these bolts to 85 foot-pounds instead. I only showed the right side, but I recommend doing both front ball joints at the same time. Always start your lug nuts by hand so you don't cross-thread them. This electric impact driver is too weak to over-tighten the lug nuts. Don't do this with an air impact wrench. With all the lug nuts kinda tight, I'll take the car off the jack stands. Now I can torque the lug nuts to 80 foot-pounds. I'm using the Harbor Freight Quinn digital torque wrench. It's real nice.
That's it. Replacing the ball joints was simple and might even be easy if they're not too rusty. Now, these Autozone ball joints technically didn't break until I stripped out the bolts, so I guess they're okay. They're definitely not as good quality as the Toyota parts. So go ahead, install ball joints from Autozone into your car. If you have a death wish, that is. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.